He had never cared for titles. Not because he didn't earn them, but because he had earned them so hard, so brutally, that by the time they were finally his, they meant less than what it had cost to get them. His name had been doubted in every hallway he entered, every classroom he walked into, every exam room where he introduced himself to patients whose eyes paused, confused that someone who looked like him could hold their chart. But none of that stopped him. He had moved through medical school like a man crossing fire, studied through hunger, through shifts, through disrespect so subtle it stained his clothes like smoke. Professors questioned his answers while praising lesser ones beside him. Peers left him off group messages. Patients mistook him for the tech, for the janitor, for the driver. He said nothing. He wrote. He read. He practiced. And when others celebrated acceptance letters, he was memorizing emergency protocols, practicing sutures on cold fruit under a flickering dorm light. He didn't want recognition. He wanted readiness. Now, years later, he was walking into a luxury hotel not for a celebration but for insurance. He wasn't attending the summit. He had been assigned to it. High-profile executives, big pharma, VIP presentations. He was the on-call emergency medical liaison. Precaution, the organizers said. He'd been instructed to wear scrubs. Visible, approachable, identifiable. But as soon as he entered the lobby, the air shifted. Security barely glanced at his badge. The receptionist pointed him toward the service elevator before realizing her mistake. The guests eyed him like a misplaced tray. No one saw a doctor. They saw a worker. He rode the elevator up. 10 other people joined, suits, silk, smiles. They didn't greet him, except for one. A man in a gray blazer, laughing too loud, eyes bright with entitlement. He looked the doctor over once, scoffed, and turned to the others. "No way you're a doctor," he said. And they laughed. Soft, safe, performative. The kind of laughter that doesn't challenge, but confirms. The doctor said nothing, only watched the numbers on the elevator panel blink past. Upstairs, the ballroom buzzed with performance. Name badges, network chatter, predictable applause. He took his place along the wall, invisible again, just where they thought he belonged, just where he needed to be, because a good physician doesn't need attention. He needs to be close to the moment no one sees coming. And 5 minutes later, it did. The ballroom lights shimmered above polished heads. Glasses clinked. Business cards passed like currency. On stage, the CEO of the hosting conglomerate stood with practiced charm. His voice measured, each word designed to stir applause from the predictable corners of the room. But behind the smile, something shifted. His sentence cracked. His posture leaned. Then he paused. Only slightly. A blink too long. A hand to his chest. A micro-moment that meant nothing to the room and everything to the man standing along the back wall. The doctor saw it before anyone. The body betraying itself. The compression of breath. The tightening jaw. The subtle falter that most would chalk up to nerves or a forgotten line. But not him. He stepped forward once, slowly. Then again, faster. By the time the CEO's legs buckled, collapsing in real time behind the podium, gasps filled the air like spilled wine. The security guard was frozen. The aides panicked. People shouted, called for help, ran toward phones, toward doors, toward anything that looked like control. But the doctor didn't shout. He moved. Within 10 seconds, he was on his knees beside the fallen man. He didn't check who was watching, didn't wait for instructions, didn't wonder if he'd be questioned. He assessed the pulse, confirmed the arrhythmia, pulled the emergency defibrillator from the wall like he already knew its exact placement. The room around him blurred. Voices, flashes, panic. But inside his body, everything was clean, trained, still. The CEO's pulse was irregular, but not gone. The breath came in stuttering gasps. Color drained. Sweat surfaced. The doctor gave sharp instructions. Someone called 911, another brought water. Most froze. Some obeyed. Others simply stood there watching a man they had spent millions building around falling apart. And beside him, the man they'd laughed at in the elevator, stabilizing his airway, loosening his collar, positioning his head with clinical ease. When the EMTs arrived, the room parted. One of them looked to the doctor, surprised. "You stabilized him?" The doctor nodded once, stood slowly, wiped his hands on his scrubs, and stepped back. No grand exit. No performance. Just presence. Control. Certainty. As the CEO was wheeled out breathing, eyes fluttering, the man in the gray blazer looked across the room. He found the doctor. The one he dismissed. The one he laughed at. The one who didn't belong. And for the first time, the man didn't speak. Because what do you say to someone who just became the reason the building didn't fall apart? The applause that followed was hesitant. Scattered. Delayed. Not for the CEO. For the doctor. And in that moment, the air changed. Not because they respected him, but because they finally realized he had always been more than what they saw. The ambulance faded into the distance, sirens swallowed by traffic and rising sirens in the hearts of the shaken. Back inside, the ballroom flickered with confusion. Staff scrambled to reset. Executives murmured damage control. Assistants opened laptops ready to spin chaos into control with bullet points and revised schedules. A PR manager pulled aside a catering lead to ask if the dessert course should still be served. But no one spoke to the doctor. He sat alone in the hallway now, a bottle of water unopened in his hand. His badge, creased, anonymous, clipped to his pocket. The silence around him wasn't respect. It was discomfort, the kind that lingers when a hierarchy cracks. They didn't know what to do with him, because they hadn't planned for him to be a hero. They hadn't planned for him at all. Across the hotel, word spread. He became a question more than a man. Who was he? Was that guy really a doctor? He looked so young. No way he's board certified. But none of their doubts erased the fact that when the system froze, he acted. And saved a man they all depended on. In a suite upstairs, executives met in hushed urgency. The company's figurehead alive, hospitalized, recovering. The doctor's name was pulled from the emergency contract. Credentials verified. Residency confirmed. A Harvard grad. Trauma certified. Specialist in high-intensity environments. They hadn't known because they never asked. Because he didn't wear the right watch. Didn't carry himself with corporate polish. Didn't look like medicine. But now, they needed him to speak. To be seen. To stabilize their image as he had stabilized their CEO. They approached him with a request. Could he give a few words? Just briefly? The doctor stood, nodded, followed. They guided him back into the ballroom, now reshaped, less noise, more attention. Someone handed him a mic. He didn't want it, but he accepted. Not for them. For every kid who had once been told he'd never make it. Every patient who hesitated when he walked in the room. Every moment he'd been mistaken for an intern, a transporter, a liability. He took a breath. Spoke once. Clear. Calm. Human. Told them what they needed to hear, what had happened, what he did, and why he did it without hesitation. No embellishment. Just truth. And then, as quickly as he came, he stepped back. No self-promotion. No applause bait. Just silence. Back in the hallway, a hotel staff member stopped him. A janitor. Older man. Eyes wide with recognition. You did good, he said, soft. That meant more than the boardroom offers that followed. More than the interviews requested. More than the headlines starting to bloom. Because that voice was real. And it saw him not for what he proved, but for who he always was. He didn't want the attention. But attention came anyway. News outlets reached out. Articles were drafted with his name misspelled in bold letters. Hero Doctor Saves Tech Titan. Panel invitations flooded in. They wanted him to sit beside industry faces to talk not about medicine but about being the unexpected. He declined most of them. Because the truth wasn't a headline. It was history. His. One of years behind locked doors, between unpaid shifts, inside libraries where he sat not to study but to survive. He returned to the hospital the next week like nothing had happened. No fanfare. No parade. Just patients waiting in crowded rooms, machines beeping, fluorescent lights humming in the background. His supervisor nodded once when he passed. No words were exchanged. But something had changed. Nurses called him doctor louder now. Residents deferred to him quicker. Even the administrative staff smiled differently, unsure if out of pride or guilt. And yet, something else began to take root. An email from the CEO's assistant. A direct request. The man wanted to see him. In person. He ignored it the first time. Then the second. But by the third, he agreed, not because of the title, but because the human he had helped deserved to speak without the fog of trauma. He visited the private hospital suite on a rainy Friday. The CEO looked smaller in bed than he had on stage. No suit. No shield. Just age and humility wearing a hospital bracelet. The doctor entered silently, checked his vitals, flipped through the charts. When he was done, he turned to leave. The CEO asked him to sit. What followed wasn't an apology. It was a reckoning. A man confronting the realization that the world he had helped build had almost let him die because it didn't believe in the hands that saved him. He offered a foundation, a fellowship, a medical grant. The doctor listened, accepted none of it. He told the man to redirect the funds not toward his name but toward students who looked like him from neighborhoods that didn't feed legacy. And the CEO, perhaps for the first time in his life, obeyed. Weeks later, students across the country received acceptance packets with scholarships attached. Some didn't know why. Some never knew who to thank. But all of them saw one name at the bottom of the fund. In honor of the doctor who acted when no one else could. No initials. No institution. Just truth. Back at work, he returned to night shift, where the rooms were quiet and the emergencies were real. Where his hands weren't praised, they were needed. And that was all he had ever wanted. To serve. To heal. To belong in the place he'd always earned. Even when no one believed he could. He became a myth in his own hospital. Not the loud kind. The whispered kind. The kind that inspired interns to work a little harder during rounds. The kind that made even the most senior surgeons pause when they passed him in the hallway. But he didn't change. Not outwardly. He still took the worst shifts, covered when others were late, stayed past sunrise when a patient coded near dawn. Because while the world outside chased stories, he still chased signs, blood pressure dropping, a tremor in the wrist, a change in pupil reaction. Where others now saw prestige, he still saw people. One night, in the trauma wing, a young boy arrived. Unconscious. Collapsed on a school bus. No ID. No guardian. The ER was busy, understaffed. But he stepped forward. Within minutes, the diagnosis came. Rare. Dangerous. A brain bleed no one had seen developing. Surgery was needed. Now. The ER wasn't ready. The staff was scrambling. The mother, when she finally arrived, was panicked and powerless. She didn't ask about his title. She asked if her son would live. He looked her in the eyes and told her the truth. Yes. Because we won't stop. The operation lasted 6 hours. He led. Steady hands. Sharp vision. Quiet command. When it was done, the boy would live. The attending physicians gave nods of respect. Nurses wept. The mother collapsed into a chair whispering thanks to a man she hadn't met an hour ago but who now lived forever in the breath her son still drew. Later, alone in the locker room, he sat and stared at the wall. Not because he needed rest. Because he needed to remember. Why he chose this. Why he never quit despite every rejection letter. Every professor who told him he wouldn't fit. Every patient who flinched when they first saw him enter the room. He remembered the classroom where he studied through eviction notices. The park bench where he read anatomy flashcards by streetlight. The small apartment where he stitched together used textbooks with borrowed tape. He remembered, and then he moved on. Because patients waited. Elsewhere, executives continued to share his story. At conferences, at fundraisers, at networking galas. But he stayed behind. Never on stage. Always behind the curtain where real care happened. Where medicine was still human. Where life didn't need applause. It just needed him. Years passed quietly. He never moved to a private practice. Never chased the titles that now came offered instead of earned. He stayed in the same hospital, in the same department, in the same night shifts that no one fought for, but where every crisis was real. He built no brand, but his presence became a pillar. New hires were told his story before they met him, not as mythology, but as reminder that the person you overlook may someday hold your life in their hands. One winter morning, a plaque appeared on the hospital's wall, near the emergency entrance. Small, brushed metal, simple. It read, "To the doctor who saw what others didn't, who moved when others paused, who chose action over applause." There was no name, just intention, because even now he didn't want to be remembered. He wanted the system to remember what it almost missed, and to never miss it again. He began mentoring quietly, at community colleges, at clinics with no press, to students who arrived with doubt in their shoulders but fire in their hands. He didn't give them speeches. He gave them space, tools, patience, told them that medicine isn't a performance. It's a promise. That being underestimated is not a curse. It's a camouflage. Until it isn't. until the moment they stand up, steady and still, and the world has no choice but to look differently. One day, during a hospital-wide drill, he saw the man in the gray blazer again. Older now, visiting, consulting. Their eyes met in the corridor. A pause, a flicker of memory. The man opened his mouth to speak, then closed it. No apology, just recognition. A silent nod that said, "I remember what I said. I know what you did. I know now." And that was enough, because the doctor didn't need his words. He already had proof. That night, the doctor walked the corridors again. Same scrubs, same gait, same quiet certainty. He passed a nurse checking vitals, a janitor mopping tile, a patient sleeping under the soft glow of a hallway bulb. And for a moment he paused, not to reflect, but to breathe. The world had once said, "No way you're a doctor." Now, it didn't need to say anything, because he had already changed what a doctor looked like. Forever.